was 19, I went to a college 2 hours north of my hometown. Maybe once every month or so, I would head back home for the weekend to stay with my family. And while I was there, it wasn't unusual for me to go on a late night run before I would shower and go to bed. On this particular weekend, I had actually remembered to bring my running shoes, something I would often forget to take home. I looked at the clock, realized it was a little before midnight, and figured I could fit in a couple miles or so before settling down for the night. Now, something that needs to be mentioned is my family lived in the middle of nowhere. We had a nice house, just almost all around the area was covered in endless cornfields and dirt roads. Honestly, I can't even remember where our nearest neighbor was, which should give you an idea of how remote it actually was. Anyway, I began my run on the usual dirt roads surrounded on both sides by cornfields. Looking back, it was actually a pretty creepy setting, especially considering the time of night, though I usually take some earbuds to listen to music, which usually gets me in a different headspace and causes me to forget all about it. I was running for maybe 10 minutes when the sound of a car coming up on the road behind me overcame the music from my earbuds. It startled me at first, as I didn't think any cars would be out this late, especially this deep into the middle of nowhere. Though I simply got over to the side of the road thinking the car would pass. But no, for whatever reason, this random vehicle stayed behind me, just following me as I ran. I didn't know what kind of vehicle it was, as each time I looked behind me, all I could see was the blinding light from the headlights. At this point, I was a little on edge, as there was clearly enough space to pass me. I decided to just stay calm and continue on my run. I'm a pretty big dude, and I was confident if it came to it, I could handle whoever was driving the vehicle. About a couple minutes later, and the driver of the vehicle steps on it, so as to now be side by side to me. I now noticed the vehicle was a very old white van. The driver's side window then rolled down, and I stopped in response so I could see what this person wanted. But as the window rolled down, I quickly realized how dark it was inside, like so much so that all I could see was the driver's black hoodie, not even his face.
Hey man, do you want to ride? It's raining pretty hard outside now.
But the weird thing is that it wasn't, not even enough to be considered a drizzle. I held back my response for a second, as I could now clearly hear shuffling around in the back of the van. It's safe to say the situation wasn't sitting well with me, and so I responded to the guy, thanking him, but overall declining his request. I turned around to continue running, and luckily, the van now sped past me, down the road and into the darkness. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. Not even 5 minutes passed since the encounter, when I could see the van in front of me stopped in the middle of the road. But not like on the side, rather it was sideways, so as to block the whole road. As I got closer, I could make out a few people, maybe 3 or 4 wearing all black walking near the van. I figured whatever was happening I didn't want any part of, and decided to just head back home the way I came instead of completing my usual loop. But to my absolute horror, as I turned around, I could see another pair of headlights gaining on me. I didn't know if it had anything to do with the van, but considering the area I was in and the time of night, there was a good chance it did. Honestly, I felt trapped. I was frozen like a deer in headlights. But that was short-lived, as I could now hear multiple footsteps running on the road behind me. That's when I realized the men near the van were now charging full speed directly towards me. I had no choice but to ditch the road and run in some random direction in the middle of the cornfield. I ran for a good 10 minutes, and for a good chunk of that, I swear I could hear footsteps behind me, but I was completely alone at this point. Luckily, my phone didn't fall out of my pocket while I was running, and I was able to track down where I was and how to get home. Now, considering I was in the middle of a cornfield, it took me about 45 minutes, though I never saw anything the rest of the night. This will most likely forever be the most disturbing thing I'll experience. To this day, I don't know what the intentions of those people were, or even who they were. Though, the fact that they trapped me and started full-on sprinting towards me, at least to me, confirms my suspicion that they did not have good intentions. I would file a police report that night, but I haven't heard or seen anything since. This happened a few months ago, during the time when quarantine and lockdown were at their worst. And this obviously caused me to spend a lot more time at home than usual. I live alone in an actually nice neighborhood. Usually, when places weren't closed, I would regularly go to the gym. Though, obviously at this point places were closed, which forced me to have to do my runs around the neighborhood. Which, all things considered, when it wasn't blazing hot outside, I actually didn't mind. It was a nice change in scenery. Now, in my neighborhood, there was this park very close to my house, and it actually had a nice loop that shot directly back towards my house, so I would occasionally take advantage of this during my runs. This day, when I was about halfway through running my loop, I noticed a man in, I'd say, his low 30s walking around the park. At first, I thought he must have been watching his kid on the playground, but soon realized there was no kid, which was kinda odd to me. Why was this grown man on the playground by himself? As I got closer, I noticed him yelling out to get my attention, but I had my headphones on, and while I could hear him, I pretended like I couldn't. I then noticed the guy started following me, and stupidly, assuming the best, I just figured he must have lived close to me and continued toward my house. But disturbingly, as I entered my front door and looked out one of my windows, I noticed him start to walk back in the direction of the park, meaning he didn't live by me, and followed me to what seemed to be just to get to know where I lived. The whole thing was weird to say the least, but I forgot about it soon after and continued on with my day. Fast forward to many hours later, and I'm in bed, already half asleep at this point, when, through my bedroom window, I noticed car lights moving back and forth on the street. Now, while this may seem normal, the neighborhood I live in is decently quiet, so of course I wanted to see what was going on. I get up, peek through my window, and notice a car stop parked right in front of my mailbox. That's when the driver's side door opened, and the guy from the park got out. I was sure that was the same guy. Now, until this point, like I said, I was still half asleep, but it's safe to say I was fully awake after seeing that same guy. I immediately closed the blinds and got back into bed. I'd never been in a situation like this, and honestly I didn't know what to do. After a few minutes, I could hear the car start back up again, followed by the headlights slowly fading away, which gave me assurance that it was nothing and I could just go back to sleep. But that was short-lived. I don't know how much time had passed, but all of a sudden I was woken up by light tapping on my window. When I opened my eyes in response, I could make out the silhouette of a man crouched at my window, tapping from the outside. I had to assume it was the same guy from the park. I decided not to move and try to pretend that I was still sleeping, not knowing if he could see inside my room or not. But that's when I remembered. My room was on the second floor, meaning that this guy would have had to have climbed on my roof to get to the outside of my window. I slowly pulled the covers over my head and called the police, whispering and telling them that there was a guy on my roof tapping on my window. I was told to slowly get out of reach of the window in case the guy tried to break in, and that there would be officers in about 5 minutes. I crawled out of bed and into the bathroom where I could lock the door. After a couple of minutes, I could hear knocking at my front door downstairs. I was still on the phone with the operator when I heard a voice from the front door call out that it was the police. I told the operator that the police were here and unlocked the bathroom door to go downstairs to meet them. But that's when the operator panically screamed at me to wait. She explained how the real police hadn't arrived yet and to not open the door under any circumstances. That's when I realized what was going on. Not only did this guy climb on my roof to tap on my window, but he somehow knew I had called the police and was trying to impersonate them to get me to open up the door. Eventually, I heard police sirens and went to go check outside of my bedroom window. There were now 3 police cars and about 5 or 6 officers outside my house. I went downstairs as one of them was knocking on the door. At that point, I thanked the operator and hung up. And when I opened the door to talk to the officer, I told them the whole story. They responded telling me that no one was there when they arrived, but that there was a ladder against the side of my house left behind. Later that night, I would notice obvious tampering with my bedroom window, further suggesting that this guy was trying to get in. In the next days, officers would patrol my street, but I never got any more news about the situation. Overall, the whole thing shook me up quite a bit, especially considering the guy's still out there, and most disturbingly knows where I live. This happened way back when I was 15. My parents weren't uptight with rules at all. They allowed me to do pretty much whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. There were very few instances where they would say no. Looking back, their parenting skills definitely weren't the best, but at the time I just thought I was lucky. Anyway, back then, my boyfriend lived only a mile away from me, and it wasn't unusual for me to sneak over to his house after his parents went to sleep. He was an only child, and his parents were pretty strict, completely unlike mine. They didn't allow us to spend much time together outside of school, which is why I would occasionally sneak over to his house in the first place. As soon as his parents would go to sleep, I would leave my house and run the 1 mile all by myself in the dead of night. It wasn't uncommon for it to be maybe 3 or 4 a.m. until I would leave for my early morning run back home. During my runs, I would make sure to stay super alert. Even at that age, I completely understood the danger I was in. I mean, I was a 15-year-old female jogging in the dark. Nobody knew where I was, and this was before cell phones were a thing, making things even worse. This night, I was on my way back, and at this point, I was only about a quarter mile from home. But as I continued running, I turned the corner into the street my house was on, just to see this van pull up out of nowhere, stopping right next to me. I honestly didn't even see or hear it coming. I stopped abruptly, in shock more than anything. But before I could turn and continue running, both the passenger and driver's side doors swung open. 2 older men stepped out and looked at me. That's when they slowly started moving closer toward me, explaining how my mom told them they had to take me back home. They then smiled the most sinister smiles I had ever seen. Now, while I was young, I wasn't stupid. I realized how much danger I was in. I could feel my fight or flight kick in, and obviously I couldn't fight. I turned around and ran as fast as I could in the direction I came from. I had never run so fast in my life. I knew I didn't have enough time to make it back home before they got in their van and caught up to me. So as soon as I lost sight of them, I ran up to some random house and hid behind a large trash can. My heart was beating out of my chest. I was completely out of breath, which forced me to cover my mouth so as not to be as loud. Not even 20 seconds later, I could hear the rocks on the loose asphalt being crushed by the tires as they slowly crept by. They stopped in front of the house for what felt like an eternity. Through their open windows, I could hear them whispering something to each other, but I couldn't make it out. Thankfully, they didn't get out, and after a while they kept moving forward, stopping by at each of the other houses. I waited until they were out of sight and bolted the rest of the way home. That was the last time I would ever take a run to my boyfriend's house. Looking back, I'm insanely fortunate to have made it out of that situation alive.